You ever look back on something and wonder when exactly you lost yourself? Not in the sad, pitiful way. More like in that cold, calculating way when the math finally clicks. 12 years, one company, hundreds of sleepless nights. And what do I have to show for it? A revoked badge, a canned HR script, and a resignation letter I did not write. My name is Marin Reyes. I am 38 years old. I was the principal systems engineer at Novera Cloud Tech, born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, graduated top of my class in computational systems design, and for over a decade, I lived and breathed Novera like it was oxygen, until they decided I was just legacy code to delete. I do not say that lightly. This company was not a job to me. It was a lifestyle, a religion, a partner that always took and never gave back. I was there when we had no funding, no roadmap, and no sleep. I was there when our first client was so paranoid about uptime that I slept on a cot in the server room for 4 days. I was there when the original system failed during a data bridge in Brussels, and I flew back during Christmas Eve to patch it manually while everyone else was drinking hot chocolate. And yes, I postponed my own wedding to fix a breach during a European compliance audit. I did not reschedule it. I canceled it. Full stop. The man I loved stood there in the church parking lot while I FaceTimed the encryption team from a data center in Oslo. That is how deep I was in. People talk about sacrifice like it is romantic, but when you are knee-deep in server logs and vendor disputes at 3 a.m., it is not romantic. It is pathetic. And still, I kept going. Because somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that my worth was tied to uptime reports and quarterly feedback loops. I did not build a system. I was the system. I wrote every critical pathway of Novera's global routing engine. I created the first behavioral compliance logic that saved them millions in penalties. I wrote the code that let 6 governments and 3 Fortune 100 clients sleep peacefully knowing their data was moving exactly where it needed to go. Quietly, reliably, invisibly. That was me. So when they announced Nova One, the company's new $920 million flagship platform, everyone assumed I would lead it, and I did. I did not ask for credit. I did not fight for the spotlight. They handed it to me, and I took it like I always had. Head down, mouth shut, hands on keyboard. I rebuilt our infrastructure layer by layer, redesigned the routing logic to scale globally, and wrote a predictive load balancer that could handle over 500,000 users without breaking a sweat. I worked 16-hour days for months. I did not even cash in my vacation days. And for what? I remember one night, midway through the Nova One rebuild, my mother called me from the hospital. She had been admitted for chest pain. I was deep in a critical rebuild of our compliance node for Southeast Asia. I looked at my screen, looked at my phone, and I made a decision that still makes me sick. I stayed. I told her I would come the next day even though I knew I would not. I sent flowers and kept coding. That was the night I realized I was too far gone to stop. I was not a person anymore. I was their backbone, their fallback, their fix-everything-on-command machine. But the thing about machines, they wear down, they burn out, they break. And companies like Novara, they do not fix you. They replace you, even if you were the one who built them in the first place. I do not tell you all this to make you feel sorry for me. This is not a sob story. This is the beginning of a reckoning. Because when they fired me, they thought they were cutting dead weight. What they actually did was unplug the only person who understood how the whole thing worked. And when the lights started flickering, no one knew where the switchboard was but me. You see, I had a feeling they might forget what I was worth. So I left them a little reminder. Not out of spite, but out of principle. Because if there is one thing I have learned in 12 years of being overlooked, overworked, and overwritten, it is that loyalty without boundaries is just self-destruction wearing a company lanyard. And mine snapped clean off. The morning it happened, I should have known something was off. The energy in the office was strange, too quiet, too rehearsed. I had barely taken a sip of my coffee when I saw the calendar invite hit my inbox. Subject line, Quick Sync, Tina E., CPO. I had never spoken to her before, never even seen her name show up in any engineering thread or sprint doc. I remember staring at the invite for a good minute, trying to figure out what a chief product officer needed to sync with me about at 9 out in the morning with no agenda. But I joined anyway because I always showed up when I was called. That was the kind of employee I was. Punctual, loyal, overly available. She walked into the conference room like she owned the building. Tall, thin, dripping in labels I could not afford even with my best year-end bonus. Tina Elridge, 27 years old. She had built a massive following as a wellness influencer before marrying into the Thorne family, specifically to the CEO's nephew. 3 months later, she was given a made-up title and a C-suite badge. And now, apparently, she was the chief product officer of one of the largest cloud platforms in North America, a platform I built with my own 2 hands. You cannot make this stuff up. She did not shake my hand. She did not say good morning. She barely looked up from her phone. Instead, she read off a line like she was auditioning for a reality show. Hey, Marin, thanks for coming in. So, listen, we are making some exciting changes. Fresh minds, new energy. No boomer code bases. You know how it is. I blinked. I thought it was a joke. I honestly thought someone from HR was going to pop out and say, "Gotcha." But then she pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table like we were closing on a condo. I opened it slowly. It was a formal exit package. My name was typed in bold at the top. My badge number was listed below it. The termination date was that same day, effective immediately. There was no severance beyond the legal minimum, no thank you letter, no mention of my years of work. Just a quiet legal warning about intellectual property restrictions and non-disclosure expectations. I looked at her, waiting for her to say more. Maybe explain herself. Maybe even pretend to regret it. Instead, she smiled like she was giving me skincare advice and said, "We really appreciate your contributions, but we are moving in a more agile direction. Think faster, cleaner, more Gen Z native. You will be fine. Honestly, take this as a sign. You are being liberated from legacy." Liberated from legacy. That was the phrase she used. I built their entire routing infrastructure. I laid the framework that handled secure transfers for multinational clients. I constructed the predictive balancing system that saved them millions in overflow traffic costs last year. I once pulled 3 all-nighters to patch a live leak during the middle of a merger. And now, I was being liberated by someone whose greatest professional achievement was monetizing self-care routines on social media. The insult did not even feel personal. It felt corporate, sterilized, indifferent. I did not say anything. What was there to say? I picked up the envelope, nodded once, and walked out. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. My badge stopped working before I reached the elevator. I had to ask the security guard to let me out of the building I had practically lived in for 12 years. That was the moment it hit me. Not when she said I was fired, not when she handed me the paperwork, but when the glass doors refused to open. That was when I realized I was not a person to them anymore. I was a locked record in an old system, archived, forgotten, replaced. I got in my car and sat there for nearly an hour. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just sat still, staring at the skyline of a company I had helped build from the ground up. I thought about all the birthdays I missed, all the family dinners I skipped, all the nights I stared at blinking code instead of resting my eyes. I thought about the clients who still trusted my systems, the data centers running on the logic I designed, the product roadmap that, until this morning, still had my fingerprints all over it. They thought they could erase me with a single envelope and a smug smile, but what they did not understand, what Tina did not even bother to research, was that the real system, the one they were about to launch, was not the one she had access to. It was not in any shared folder or onboarding doc. It lived elsewhere, quiet, encrypted, waiting, and only I knew how to turn it on. They thought they had replaced me. What they actually did was wake me up. What Tina and Randall never understood, what they never even bothered to ask, was that the system they launched that day was never the real thing. It looked like it. It felt like it. But it was not. Months before they fired me, I had seen enough warning signs to know I could not trust the executive team with the full product, not with the way they cut corners, buried reports, and shoved launch dates forward to please shareholders. I knew the risk of giving them total access to my work, so I made a decision, quietly, methodically, without asking for permission, because, frankly, no one would have seen it coming anyway. I built 2 versions of Nova 1. The first was what I called the investor-friendly shell. It ran basic operations, simulated data traffic, and looked polished in demos. It had just enough code to fake functionality. That was the version I showed in sprint reviews and pre-launch meetings. Everyone thought it was the real thing. But behind the scenes, I was building something else, something deeper, something built to last. I called it Echo Vault. And unlike the shallow demo version, Echo Vault could scale across global regions, adapt in real time to bandwidth surges, and detect foreign intrusion attempts before they breached the perimeter. It was clean, secure, hardened, and only I could open it. I did not use a password. Passwords get copied. I did not use multi-factor authentication. That can be bypassed. Echo Vault was tied directly to me. My voice, my walking pattern, the dilation of my pupils under a specific blue light spectrum, behavioral biometrics. I had trained the system to recognize my movements over a year. That meant no one, not even the CTO, could initiate a deployment or escalate permissions without triggering a verification chain that started and ended with me. It was extreme. I know that. But when you have spent 12 years watching executives pretend to know what secure means, you take precautions. The keychain that governed the final deployment credentials was never uploaded to the company's internal systems. It was stored offline, encrypted, inside a secure hardware enclave that I kept in a private safety deposit box under my LLC's name. I did not hide it out of spite. I hid it because they were sloppy. They rushed product cycles, they ignored compliance flags, they pressured me to approve unstable builds just to meet optics deadlines. I gave them a demo system because I knew the moment they thought they understood it, they would try to take shortcuts. And that is exactly what they did. A few weeks before they let me go, Tina had pushed the launch date forward by almost 3 weeks without consulting engineering. She announced to the entire company that Nova One would be live ahead of schedule to show we were, in her words, an agile-first organization. I watched people panic behind their monitors, silently working overtime, cutting corners just to meet an impossible deadline. I kept quiet. I let them believe they were almost there, all while knowing that the version they had access to was never meant to go live. It was a ghost system, a shell, harmless on its own, but completely useless at scale. They thought they were being clever. They thought by firing me, they were removing dead weight and bringing in fresh vision. But in their rush to strip the company of legacy, they never once asked what was powering the foundation. They saw a working demo and assumed it would carry the weight of a global launch. They saw graphs on a slide deck and mistook them for architecture. They saw the outer walls and assumed the whole house was built. But they never checked the wiring. They never tested the load. They never asked who held the keys to the core. And the truth is, I had stopped offering those keys months ago. Not out of malice, but out of experience. I had spent years building things that were taken, rebranded, and used without recognition. I had seen my work diluted, misused, and in some cases, broken beyond repair. Echo Vault was the first system I built with real boundaries, real accountability, real ownership. It was my life's work, and I was not going to hand it over to someone who thought boomer code bases were the enemy of innovation. When they launched Nova One, they were not launching my system. They were launching a ghost, one that looked beautiful from a distance, but vanished the moment you asked it to carry real weight. And when the cracks started to show, they had no idea that the real system, the only one that could save them, was locked away, waiting, listening, and completely out of their reach. A week after they fired me, Tina Elridge stood on a soundstage wearing a pastel pantsuit and a wireless headset, beaming into a camera as she introduced the world to the future of global connectivity. The Nova One livestream was polished, loud, and absolutely hollow. She called it 100% Gen Z engineered. She said it was reimagined by the next generation, free from what she referred to as bloated legacy structures. I watched it from my couch, eating cereal in sweatpants. I laughed out loud when she said Nova One was built from the ground up by fresh minds. She had no idea that the very thing she was selling was still standing on the bones of my architecture. About an hour before they went live, I got a message. Not a public post, not a press release. A direct message from Jake Nolan, the acting chief technology officer. Jake was not flashy. He was one of the few people at Novera who actually understood systems instead of just talking about them. The message was short. He wrote, "We cannot remove your logic from the core routing engine. It is still flagging compliance binds in the EMEA nodes. Need your input ASAP." I stared at that message for a while, not because I was surprised, but because I knew this day would come. Those compliance binds, they were not bugs. They were intelligent blocks I wrote into the system to prevent unauthorized region hopping. You cannot legally route user data between certain countries without applying for clearance through multiple frameworks. I built that logic by hand, country by country, clause by clause. It was not just code. It was legal armor. And now they were trying to rip it out without knowing how it was stitched together. I replied once. That was it. "You fired the only person who can decode those binds?" He did not reply after that. Maybe he was pulled into meetings. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he already knew it was too late. Either way, they pushed forward. They always did. Even when they did not understand the foundation, they painted over it and called it new. Tina stood in front of that glowing Nova One logo and told investors that the system was cleaner, faster, younger. She had no clue that under all the glitter and branding, my logic was still making decisions. My audit trails were still watching their every move. The part that burned the most was not the lie. It was the erasure. They sold the platform as if they had torn down everything old and rebuilt it with this magical wave of innovation. But what they had actually done was slap a fresh coat of paint on something they did not understand and hoped it would hold. They were too proud to admit they could not detach my work without losing core functionality. So they kept the bones and dressed it up in buzzwords. I should have felt flattered, but I just felt insulted. The launch stream ended with loud music, flashing transitions, and a pre-recorded message from the CEO, Randall Keene. He congratulated the team and praised Tina's visionary leadership. My name was not mentioned once, not in the credits, not in the documentation, not in the thank you slides. 12 years of engineering, and the system I built had been renamed, whitewashed, and broadcast as something entirely new. As if I had never been there, as if I had not sacrificed holidays, relationships, and sleep to keep that system stable. They thought the world would fall in love with a shiny interface and a clean marketing line. But what they forgot was that systems do not care about branding. They care about integrity, logic, and structure. I built Nova One to hold the weight of the world. They just cared that it looked good on a phone screen. And while they celebrated, I knew something they did not. That demo system they had been polishing for months? It was never meant to scale. It was a front, a hollow echo of what could have been. And soon, the world was going to see what happens when you put lipstick on a system you do not understand. Because no matter how glossy the surface, the core still belonged to me. And it was about to remind them. Launch day, 10:12 in the morning. I still had Principal Systems Engineer, Novera Cloud Tech, listed on my LinkedIn profile when the first message popped into my inbox. It was from a junior engineer I used to mentor. No subject line. Just 2 words in all caps. Help us. I refreshed my inbox. Another came in, then another. Slack messages, text alerts, private emails, one after the other, all pouring in like a dam had cracked open. And they all said the same thing. Internal tools had stopped responding, APIs were hanging without return values. The system had gone quiet. Not slow, not buggy, silent. I picked up my coffee and walked to the window. My apartment overlooks the city, and even from that high up, I swear I could feel the tension in the air. When a system this big fails, the consequences are not just technical. They are political, financial, personal. Nova One was not just a product. It was the backbone of data transfers between multiple international partners. 5 continents relied on that launch going smoothly. And now, according to the reports trickling into my inbox, session handshakes were collapsing one by one. Authentication tokens were not refreshing. Server clusters were dropping out of sync. And in Australia, the system went into a total timeout loop. I turned on Bloomberg. The headline ticker read, Nova One launch stumbles, global clients reporting access issues. I smiled, but not out of satisfaction. It was something colder than that, something heavier. Because I had warned them. I had laid out every risk in plain language before they decided I was legacy. I had flagged every shortcut they took. I had written those error messages myself, and now they were flashing in real time across live dashboards. To them, it looked like chaos. But to me, it looked like a plan unfolding exactly as expected. The Go system they launched was never designed to go live. It had no scaling infrastructure. It had no active redundancy. It could handle 5,000 simulated users on a loop, but the moment it faced real, unpredictable global traffic, it buckled. Just like I knew it would. They launched a house made of glass, and the first gust of real data shattered it. What they had deployed was a static shell, clean on the surface, but empty inside, and now the clients were calling. The media was asking questions, and the board was probably preparing a firestorm of its own. I watched the live incident log get leaked in real time on a Reddit engineering thread. Someone from the network team uploaded screenshots of console errors that pointed directly to the dummy bridge code I had written for the demo version. Every route failed to authenticate against real-world security protocols. The fallback layers were not even present. I had stripped them out intentionally. Because this was never meant to be anything more than a presentation tool, but they made it their foundation. And now, it was turning to dust under their feet. Somewhere in the middle of all that noise, someone tried to reach me on an old internal messaging app. It was Jake again. "System's unraveling, can you call me?" I did not answer. Not because I wanted revenge, but because there was nothing to say. They had made their choice. They took something I built with care, misunderstood it, misused it, and sold it as their own. The responsibility was not mine anymore. I was not an employee. I was not even a consultant. I was just an observer, and watching from a distance, seeing the cracks widen and the truth pour through. It felt surreal. By the end of the day, 4 federal clients had pulled their contracts. One major bank froze its agreement until further notice, and according to one of the engineers who messaged me anonymously, Tina had locked herself in a meeting room with a PR rep and refused to speak to the team. Panic had officially set in. The music from the live stream had faded. The lights were off. And for the first time in their glossy little world, Novara was facing silence. The kind of silence that comes when you launch something you do not understand. And I sat on my couch and watched it happen. Quiet, still, and strangely calm. Because I knew the truth. The real system, the one that worked, the one that could have prevented all of this. It was still offline, locked, waiting, and tied to someone they had let go without a second thought. By Friday afternoon, Novara's stock had dropped like a stone, 47% gone in under 2 days. The numbers rolled across the bottom of every financial news screen like a countdown. Investors were in full panic mode. Emails from brokers leaked within hours, all saying the same thing: pull out, minimize exposure, secure capital. People who had once bragged about Nova One's potential were now distancing themselves like it was toxic waste. It was not just a bad launch. It was a collapse, and it was loud. The biggest hit came when a Scandinavian investment bank, the one Novara had been chasing for over a year, terminated their $223 million deal. No warning, just a formal letter from the chief information officer. I read it when it leaked to the press. He wrote, word for word, "This system is non-functional and dangerously misrepresented. We are ceasing all negotiations immediately." That statement alone wiped out another 10% of Novara's market value within an hour. The company tried to downplay it in a press release, but it was too late. The confidence was gone. And when confidence disappears in tech, everything else follows. Clients began pulling their contracts, one by one, some quietly, others with lawsuits. The government partnership they bragged about during the live stream, suspended until further review. Several customers demanded audits of their data routing and compliance logs. When they could not provide consistent records, because again they had launched a broken demo system, those clients walked. They lost 3 major deals before the week was even over. But the public only knew part of the story. What really set the building on fire came from the inside. Vivian Coe, my friend, and one of the only people I trusted in that entire company, was still in human resources. We used to get coffee once a week, usually just to vent and keep each other sane. She messaged me the night the system failed. She said she had found something. internal memos, drafted by the QA team weeks before launch. In those memos, they specifically warned Tina and the leadership team that the deployment version had incomplete activation protocols and was not stable enough for production. The memos outlined exact failure points, predicted API stalls, flagged the absence of region locking and fallback logic. Those warnings were not just ignored, they were deleted. Vivian sent me screenshots of the original messages with timestamps. She also had a screen recording of a private Slack channel where Tina told someone to scrub all the risk chatter before the board sees it. It was written casually, like she was removing a typo. But that message, that was the match. Vivian leaked the entire file set, emails, memos, and recordings, to a tech journalism outlet under full anonymity. Within 12 hours, it was front-page news. The headline was brutal. Novara ignored internal warnings before global failure. Suddenly, this was no longer just a technical issue. It was negligence. By Friday evening, the board of directors held an emergency session. According to someone who was in the room, Randall Keene, the CEO, looked like he had aged a decade overnight. Tina was nowhere to be seen. Her office lights were off, and her assistant told people she was working remotely for a while. Executives scrambled to find a narrative that made sense, but none of it stuck. The paper trail was too clean. The lies were too obvious. Everyone could see it now. The launch was a disaster built on vanity, ignorance, and rushed decisions. That night, I sat at home, sipping tea, reading article after article about the company that had erased me. The irony was sharp. For years, they made me feel invisible. Now they were collapsing under the weight of a system they never understood, one they were too proud to ask me about. And Vivian? She did not just save herself, she saved the truth. And in this kind of story, truth is power. Not loud power, not the kind that screams in press conferences. Quiet power, the kind that moves silently through code, through records, through leaked screenshots that speak louder than any denial ever could. And what hurt them the most? It was not me. It was not even the system failure. It was the realization that everything they built, everything they sold, everything they celebrated was rooted in a lie they told themselves, all the way to the bottom. During the emergency board call that Friday night, I already knew what was coming. The press was circling like sharks, clients were demanding accountability, and internally, Novara was trying to make sense of the blackout, still pretending they had some level of control left. Randall Keene, the CEO, was pacing in his office, red in the face, demanding anyone, fix the system. He told Jake Nolan, the acting CTO, to bring Echo Vault online, not the flashy demo version, but the real backbone, the one they thought was still quietly humming behind Nova One's marketing banners. But the second Jake tried to run the secure unlock command, the system pushed back. A single response flashed across the secure terminal. Access denied. Biometric owner status revoked. Please contact primary architect for transfer of control. Silence. Total silence in that conference room. The kind of silence that does not mean confusion. It means fear. Echo Vault was not broken. It was perfectly intact, operational, secured, but only accessible to one person. Me. That was the moment the truth finally hit them. The real platform, the one that ran on behavioral biometrics, adaptive encryption, and zero-trust architecture, was not company property. It was mine. Months ago, long before the layoffs and betrayals, I had spun up a private build under my own registered LLC, Echo Vault Systems LLC, filed out of Delaware, with full documentation, chain of custody, and intellectual property protections. Quiet, legal, impeccable. I was not naive. I had seen the writing on the wall for months. Sloppy decisions, reorg after reorg. Directors more focused on branding and buzzwords than actual architecture. So I documented every line of innovation that was original. Every framework, every protocol layer, every asynchronous fallback that I authored personally. I kept separate code branches. I ran clean builds. I logged every commit from my own environments. And 6 months ago, I walked into a notary's office and signed it all over to myself. My signature was embedded into every compiled block of the Echo Vault kernel, not metaphorically, literally. A hash chain anchored in my developer key, time-stamped, backed by the blockchain service I had integrated for version integrity. They had no backdoor, no override, no clue. Tina, of course, had no idea what any of this meant. I heard from a friend that she asked, "Can we just reset the admin password?" Randall nearly threw his phone at the wall. Jake tried to keep things calm, but he was sweating. He knew what he was looking at, and he knew what it meant. Every failover node, every smart compliance bind across EMEA, every security envelope tied to federal traffic, it all ran on Echo Vault logic, and they did not own a single byte of it. Worse still, they had deployed Nova One using a patchwork that relied on Echo Vault APIs without licensing it properly. They had used the demo keys, public, limited, temporary, and built production on top of that skeleton. It was like building a skyscraper on a paper map. The second those keys expired, everything failed, and now they could not legally restart it without my permission. Within the hour, legal teams were scrambling. I had registered the IP with the USPTO. I had timestamps. I had audit trails. I had even warned Jake in a private Slack message 6 months ago, politely but clearly, that anything built using my framework without licensing would be in violation of federal IP law. He never responded, but he saw it, and now so did their lawyers. What stung them the most was not just the loss of control. It was the fact that I had done everything above board. No sabotage, no breach, just airtight methodical protection of my own work. I had given them every chance to do this the right way. But they wanted shortcuts. They wanted shiny. They wanted credit without contribution. Now they were locked out of the very thing they thought they owned. And the only door back in was through me, the woman they pushed out with a 2-sentence exit letter and a forced badge drop. I could have been petty. I could have gloated. But I did not say a word. I just waited. Because sometimes, revenge does not need a grand gesture. Sometimes, it is just letting the truth arrive in the form of a login screen that says, "Access denied." It started with a 38-second clip posted anonymously to a small subreddit about enterprise software ethics. No one thought much of it at first. A blurry conference room, a shaky phone camera. But the audio was clear, and that was all it took. Tina Elridge, dressed like she was heading to brunch instead of a strategy meeting, stood at the head of the table gesturing at her laptop. Her voice cut through the static. "Just delete that AI audit module. It's making the demo laggy and I need it clean for the launch stream." The room went quiet in the video, just like I imagined it had in real life. One of the engineers pushed back gently, something about compliance requirements. But Tina snapped, "It's not real production yet. We need investor hype, not warnings about EU node ethics. Just kill it." That AI audit module, she dismissed so casually, was mine. I had built it after spending 2 weeks researching GDPR bind propagation and fine-tuning risk scores across data sharing layers. It was not decorative. It was a safeguard. One of the last ones still active after they tried to gut the system for speed and marketing gloss. The clip exploded across Reddit by noon. By evening, it was trending on YouTube under tech fails, then corporate meltdowns. Former employees started commenting, confirming Tina's voice. Internal emails leaked, showing that she had overruled the engineering lead twice before that clip was even recorded. The press picked it up next. One headline read, "CPO orders compliance tool deleted for better demo. Now millions of records at risk." Within 24 hours, Tina was placed on indefinite leave by Novara's board. They tried to word it softly, something about personal time and strategic transition, but the damage was already done. Shareholders were furious. Clients began asking if their data had been routed through unverified systems. A Scandinavian regulator called for a full audit, and all of it pointed back to that moment in the video. Her words, her tone, her recklessness. Internally, panic erupted. Vivian Coe, the HR whistleblower, sent me a quiet message that Sunday. Board called an emergency session. Randall's next. And sure enough, by Monday morning, Randall Keene had retired early. No farewell email, no press statement, just a line in a filing and a new interim CEO named by the board. The same man who had spent months pushing TikTok buzzwords into product meetings was suddenly gone. I did not leak the footage. I did not need to. Novara's decay was self-inflicted. All I had done was protect my work and walk away when it became clear that integrity no longer lived in those halls. But when people asked why I stayed silent during the launch disaster, why I did not try to fix things, I showed them that clip, that moment of Tina deciding, without blinking, to remove the only remaining ethical safeguard just to make a live stream smoother. That was the culture they created, one where actual engineering was treated as an inconvenience, where Gen Z disruption meant cutting corners and blaming legacy logic when things broke. And now, they were paying the price for it. The media framed it as a cautionary tale. Investors called it a preventable failure. But to me, it was justice served through exposure. Not sabotage, not malice, just the truth captured in a moment, broadcast to the world. Tina had silenced engineers, deleted warnings, rolled her eyes at compliance, and in the end, the only thing that lagged was her career, slammed into a wall of accountability she never saw coming. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, sipping tea, my phone lighting up with alerts and messages from former teammates. Most just said, "Finally." Because sometimes the best revenge is not yelling louder. It is letting the silence speak for you, letting their own words echo back in a room full of consequences. 6 months after walking out of Novera with nothing but a severance packet and the clean conscience of someone who refused to lie, I stood backstage at the SF Codex Summit with a single USB key in my pocket. Inside it was everything. My code, my infrastructure stack, my rebuilt UI, my biometric security layer. Echo Vault had evolved into something bigger, something I now called Veilpoint. I had renamed it not out of revenge, but rebirth. Veilpoint stood for privacy, integrity, and absolute system transparency. Exactly the values that Novera had trampled in their chase for fast hype and fake metrics. That morning, I looked out at a packed conference room filled with startup founders, CTOs, compliance officers, and more than a few press badges. The moment they saw the agenda slide, live demo, multi-region adaptive system underload, they stopped sipping coffee and started paying attention. I stepped up to the mic and introduced myself. Hi, I am Emma Caldwell. I spent 12 years building an enterprise routing platform you probably use without even knowing it. Today, I am showing you what happens when that platform is reimagined by someone who actually understands how it works. And then I started the live demo. I launched 600,000 unique user sessions, split across 8 regions, including one deliberately unstable network in Southeast Asia. Real-time dashboards lit up. Not one session failed. No timeouts. No memory spikes. The load balancer adjusted routes dynamically, rerouting traffic around cold nodes before latency crossed 60 milliseconds. People leaned forward in their seats. Cameras came out. Someone from the Wall Street Journal was live tweeting every graph update. At the 10-minute mark, I let them peek behind the scenes. Veilpoint runs entirely on zero-trust logic, with biometric locked admin layers and predictive load throttling. Every line of code is traceable. Every audit is immutable. No shortcuts, no cover-ups. And when I said that last part, I saw heads turn in the audience. They knew who I was. They had seen the Tina video. They had read the exposés. Now they were watching the person who had walked away from it all, calmly running a system that worked better than anything they had seen from a so-called billion-dollar unicorn. When I walked off stage, I barely had time to breathe. 3 people from 3 different venture capital firms surrounded me before I even made it to the water table. One of them, a managing partner at a firm I will not name, literally pulled a branded napkin from his jacket, scribbled the words 30-mile term sheet, Veilpoint, and handed it to me like we were closing a deal at a jazz club in 1974. "We want in before this hits TechCrunch," he said. "How fast can you scale?" Another investor said, "You just showed us what the future of secure routing looks like, and you did it without a marketing stunt, without fluff, just performance." I had expected questions. I had expected skepticism. Instead, I got offers, 3 of them. By the time I reached the exit doors of the convention center, my inbox had 6 meeting requests and a lunch invite from the founder of a top security startup. 11 minutes. That is how long it took from the end of my talk to my first serious funding commitment. Later that week, I signed my first deal. Not for $30 million, but for 42. Structured over 2 rounds with full founder control intact. The lawyers were stunned at how clean my IP documentation was. That was the benefit of preparing before I ever left Novara. Everything had been registered under my LLC. Every asset was mine. They tried to fire me, erase me, replace me with someone who had never written a line of code in her life. Now I was the one with the runway, the one with a team of real engineers ready to build something that actually worked. And I was doing it on my terms. As for Novera, their name came up plenty during investor calls, but only as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when companies chase flash over substance, when they value buzzwords over builders. I did not need to drag them down. They did that all by themselves. All I had to do was show the world what happens when you let a real architect lead. After the SF Codex Summit, my inbox was flooded. Journalists, investors, former coworkers, even total strangers who just wanted to say thank you. People kept asking me the same question. So, are you going to sue them? I got that one a lot. Or, are you going to gloat? You took them down in public. Now's your chance to bury them for good. But I never needed to. I never wanted to. What happened in Novera was not revenge. It was results. And results do not lie. I smiled politely when people asked those things. Then I went back to work. Because the truth is, I had already moved on. Novara fired me because they wanted something flashier, trendier, easier to control. And in doing so, they erased their own foundation. They removed the one person who understood how everything really worked, not just the code, but the vision, the flow, the quiet architecture beneath the hype. Once they severed that link, it was only a matter of time. During my keynote's closing minutes, I paused. The audience was quiet, phones were down, everyone was listening. I looked around at a room full of engineers, founders, system thinkers, the people who keep the invisible engines of the world running. And I said this: systems rarely fail. Leadership does. And when that failure happens, it is not sabotage. It is gravity. I told them I did not believe in revenge. I believed in redundancy. I believed in preparing for failure before it happens, not after it is broadcast on Bloomberg. I believed in building structures that do not depend on a single personality, trend, or title. I believed in clean exits, clean entries, and clean ownership. And that is what I had done. I had built Veilpoint so it could outlive me, not serve me. When I walked off that stage, I did not feel triumphant. I felt relieved. Not because I had won, but because I had finally handed off what I built into hands that would not misuse it. I knew that Veilpoint would not be mine forever. That was never the plan. My role was to architect it, stabilize it, and then let it grow into something more. Something useful, something trusted. The audience gave me a standing ovation, but I did not stay long to bask in it. I just nodded, said thank you, and stepped backstage to pack up my laptop. Later that evening, I sat alone in a quiet corner of a hotel bar. No press, no cameras, just me and a warm cup of green tea. I looked out the window and thought about the 12 years I spent building Novara's backbone. And then I thought about the 6 months it took to build something better from scratch. Not for revenge, not to prove a point, but because when you love the work, you do not let it die just because someone else is short-sighted. They thought they had silenced me when they replaced me with a TikTok strategist in designer heels. But they never understood that I was not building it for them. I was building it because it needed to exist. Because when you have spent your life solving problems no one sees, you do not need applause. You need clean code, stable sessions, and a reason to keep pushing. I did not sue. I did not demand apologies. I did not take back what I gave. I just walked away and kept building. Because the people who matter, they saw, they understood, and they showed up, clients, engineers, partners. Not because of who I used to work for, but because of what I had built in spite of them. This was never a comeback. Comebacks are for stories that ended. Mine never did. This was a handoff, from the past to the present, from silence to strength, from chaos to control. And when I think back to the moment I handed in my badge and walked out of that building with nothing but clarity, I realize it was the best exit I ever made. No door slammed, no words shouted, just quiet professional closure. And then, a better beginning.